Hi, fellow San Luis Valley Trout Unlimited members, friends, and avid fly fishermen. My name's Doug Camp, and welcome to the first installment of the Fly Fisherman's Bench. I'm a member of the SLV board, and I love to fly fish and tie flies and teach. And this is our first installment. We hope that this small video segment helps you understand a little bit more about fly tying, insects that trout eat, and our local rivers and how to fish them. So the first fly I'm going to tie for this inaugural video is a fly that I would have in my box all season long, spring, summer, winter, and fall. It's the Pat's rubber legs, or Patty's rubber legs. It's also sometimes called Jimmy's rubber legs, and it's actually an old cousin to the Montana Bitch Creek nymph stonefly pattern that was invented so long ago. Now, this pattern can be fished in a variety of sizes and a variety of colors, but I'm going to talk about it mainly in the context of tying the pattern for the big giant salmon flies that live in our rivers and the golden stones. I will generally use a very large pattern, a size 4 to 6, in the late spring and early summer, and then the rest of the season a pattern size around 8 to 10. Here's one of the patterns tied on a size 4 curved hook to imitate the giant Pteronarcis californica stonefly that we call the salmon fly. You can see it's a big chunk of food for a trout to eat, but they readily move to this fly when these insects are available right before they crawl onto the land, onto dead plants and bushes to become the mature insect. In the wintertime, I might fish something as diminutive as this little size 10 blackstone. I carry them in browns, grays, blacks, red browns, goldens, and again in the 4 sizes. Now, to tie this fly, you're going to need either a straight long shank hook, like this one I'm holding, or a curved long shank hook, like this one. You're going to need weight, because for the most part, these flies, or the insects themselves, the nymphs, are found right on the bottom of the river. So you're going to either need to use a bead head, like this tungsten bead on this curved hook, which works very well and shortens the process. Or you can use flat lead wire, which is what I'm going to use tonight because I prefer the way it makes the insect look and the way the insect, the fly pattern, floats. Or you can use non-toxic lead wire. This is a round non-toxic lead wire. You're going to need a big thick thread, probably 3/0 or some other brand that will allow you to cover a lot of surface area in a short amount of time. You're going to need rubber legs. A note about rubber legs: I like the square flat kind because I think they wiggle better, but round ones work just fine. Sometimes I tie my patterns with solid colors like this brown, but also sometimes I use a mottled color like this ginger and black, especially for the golden stones, which are a more mottled insect. Let's see, hooks, rubber legs. Chenille. You're going to need chenille to tie the body. On the bigger patterns, I like to use, the bigger patterns being 4s and 6s, I like to use a medium-sized chenille. And I'm especially partial to this seal brown, they call it. I would call it red, brown, and black. But on the smaller size flies, for the golden stones, and for the part of the year when a lot of the big mature insects aren't available, I like to use a small size chenille. And this fly fish food company makes a great chenille that they call ginger and black. And you notice the diameter of this chenille is much smaller. It's much easier to work with on small flies. Now, when you first get your chenille in the store or from mail order or whatever, it's usually going to be wrapped around a piece of cardboard, which is called a skein, like this. I prefer to take my chenille off of this skein immediately and let it kind of come back to a more consistent shape. Otherwise, you have little indentions and dimples in the chenille, and sometimes that interferes with the taper of the body. Once you get that chenille out, you might take a couple of moments to stretch it and run your fingers through it like this to get the kinks out of it and to get it to refluff. You might want to do that several times before you actually tie the fly, a day or two in advance. Just prep it. Get it to look as consistent as possible. Okay, let's start tying. Let me pull my vise around here. Let me tilt it down. A word to the beginner tyers or infrequent tyers. I think you'll have much more success tying this fly if you use the straight shank hook other than the curved shank hook. I tie dozens of these patterns every winter, and I find that I like this curved shank hook better because it imparts more movement. At least that's what I think. Who knows what the trout think? Pardon me, but I think it imparts more movement. But it's definitely a harder hook to tie on to begin with. Okay, let's begin with our 3/0 thread. Let's start right behind the eye of the hook. Hope you can see this. And lay down about 3 or 4 thread wraps over your tag end of your thread. Now I'm going to move this little phone camera a little bit closer. Once I get those 3 or 4 wraps in and I know it's not going to slip, then I'm going to wrap my thread all the way down to the point of the hook and basically try to somewhat cover the shaft, the shank of the hook, so that when I tie my lead wire in on this hook, it doesn't slide around. I'll wrap my thread all the way back to the eye. I take my wire, whether it be round or flat, lay it on top of the shank of the hook, like so. Take my thread and wrap it tightly around that lead about a half dozen times, and then back on top of itself. Now that lead wire should be well attached and it should not slip. At this point in time, we take our lead wire and we begin to carefully wrap it along the shank of the hook. Get it nice and tight, nice and flat. Wrap it all the way down to the point of the hook. I'm going to move this light now at this point in time because you really don't need to see me. You need to see the hook. Let's see what we can do right there. Looks pretty good. Okay, now, if you want your fly lightly weighted, 1 wrap is probably good. If you want it heavily weighted, which I like mine that way, then you might want to wrap back. I also tie this pattern with no weight at all because oftentimes at the peak of runoff, right before or right during the time when the stoneflies come out, they migrate to the edge of the stream and they're in very, very, very shallow water. And the fish take advantage of this because they can then move to the edges of the river and station there and eat these insects and not be out in the heavy water. So sometimes I want to fish this fly with no weight on it at all because I'm only fishing in about 1 foot to 1.5 foot of water. Okay, let's go ahead and tie our lead wire off nice and neatly. Take your scissors. If you only have a couple of pairs of scissors, if you don't have junk scissors, then by all means, when you cut this lead wire, you cut it at the very back of your scissors so you don't dull the ever important tips, which should be razor sharp for cutting hackles and threads and things like that. Okay, take this thread and wrap it now back down the lead wire, then wrap it back up the lead wire. We're just trying to lay down a smooth base so that when we tie in the rubber legs, we don't have as much trouble. Because believe me, when you first start tying this fly, the rubber legs are going to give you the most grief. That's just what it is. And you have to learn how to negotiate those little boogers with care. Now you notice I stopped the thread wraps at the point of the hook, but now I'm going to go ahead and continue the thread down past the barb of the hook, right to where the hook starts to turn down just a little bit. And I'm going to take one of my rubber legs, which I have already pre-cut, and I'm going to double it over so that I make a little loop like this. I'm going to pinch that between my forefinger and my thumb, then exchange it again and put that little loop right on top of the hook shank. I'm going to wrap the thread around it once, twice, 3 times. And I want those rubber leg fibers to make a neat little Y, which kind of looks well like the way the stonefly might carry its tail. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and wrap forward and wrap up to the wire. You can think of the body of the stonefly as being in 3 segments, and you divide those up evenly. Here's the back segment. Here's the middle segment. Here's the front segment. For the purpose of tying legs in, you want to try to concentrate those legs into the middle and the front segment. So you're going to ask me now, well, how many legs do these critters have? Well, they have 6. But we only need to use 3 fibers, because the way we're going to do it is we're going to take this nice flat rubber leg and lay it right on top of the shank of the hook. Wrap the thread over it once, twice, position it evenly. Now we take one side, usually I start with the side nearest me, and I take the thread and I wrap it in front of that rubber leg to try to make it straight from the hook shank, a 90-degree angle. Then I wrap behind the other one, and I do the same thing. This doesn't have to be perfect. These legs are going to bounce around and move, and you're going to get another chance to straighten them with the chenille. So just try to get them basically in the right place, but make sure they're attached well with 4 or 5 wraps of thread. Okay, let's go up and put the middle leg in now. Remember, this is where the middle segment ends and gives up to the front segment. Take our rubber leg, try to find about halfway, 1 thread wrap, 2 thread wraps. Okay, make it even now. Start with the leg that's nearest you. Try to get it in position. Now take the leg away from you. Same thing. You may have to tug on it, pull it, wrap the thread behind it. Sometimes you move the first leg that you positioned and you have to reposition it. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. You'll have an opportunity with the chenille itself. Okay, that's the second leg. Now let's do the last leg. Now you notice that I didn't wrap the thread all the way up to the eye of the hook. That's because if I crowd that eye of that hook, it's going to be very hard to put in a thread head, whip finish, and the antenna. So I leave some room here. Now I'm going to take the third leg. I'm going to lay it on top of the shank, try to find the center. Pinch the thread between my index finger and my thumb. That's a technique that all beginner fly tyers should learn how to do well. Let's reposition it again. 2 wraps. Try to center the legs on the shank of the hook. Now let's get my first leg in place. It's going to be a toughie. I can tell it already. There we go. It's a little better. Now let's do the leg that's on the other side of the hook. This is going to require me wrapping behind that leg and pulling it forward. Wrap it around the shank of the hook. Wrap it behind the leg. Pull it forward. Let's do it one more time. Pull it forward. Wrap the thread around the shank of the hook. Okay, so we have our legs in position, we have our tail in position. Now let's wrap the thread all the way to the back. Try not to push down the legs or move them. Leave yourself a little space before you get to the tail fibers and pick up your chenille. Now, I've cut my chenille, in like a 2-foot section, because if you work with the whole skein of chenille, it's going to bunch around the thread. It's going to cause you troubles. So just go ahead and cut it into a manageable section for 3 or 4 flies. Take a little bit of the chenille, point it away from the tail fibers, and tie it in well. 3 or 4 wraps. Wrap it almost down to the tail fibers. Now wrap the thread forward all the way to the eye of the hook. And to get the thread out of the way, take your whip finisher and just put 2 little wraps around the shank below the eye of the hook. Now this bobbin can bounce around and do whatever it wants, and your thread's not going to lose place. Now we take the chenille. Make sure you're positioning the tail fibers where you want them. The shape of the body of a stonefly is basically a long carrot, just like a mayfly. So we want to start with the back of it being very thin. I'm going to reposition this one more time because I want to get just a little more length out of this if I can without messing up my tail fibers. Now I start wrapping forward. And this first segment, I'm only going to do 1 double over, and that's right before I meet the first set of legs. Wrap around the set of the legs. Legs look good. They look straight. Okay, let's move forward. I don't think the fish care whether the legs are straight, to be honest with you, but I'm a perfectionist, so I like the legs to look straight. Now we start to double over some wraps to build the bulk of the body of the stonefly. And I'm going to come in front of these legs, but then come behind them again one more time. A technique that helps hold the legs in place and helps you build the bulk of the fly. Now we're coming up further. We want this fly to even look a little bit more bulkier, just like the real thing. We come in front of those legs, just like I did before. Come behind. And one more wrap in front. And now we're going to tie off because we don't want a big pile of chenille up there at the head of the fly trying to work with the rubber legs to tie in an antenna or to do a thread head. Carefully manage that chenille. You might have to give it a little bit of a haircut. Try not to cut your thread while you're doing that. Okay, we're getting close. Let's see what that fly looks like. Lots of wiggly legs, a nice tail, good taper from skinny to thick. Now we're going to lay down some thread. Like so. Now we've got to tie in one more set of rubber legs as antennas. So again, just like on the tail, we take the rubber legs right here, double them over, and exchange the fingers that are holding it. You want that little bitty loop like we had on the tail, right? Now you lay that little loop right on top of the hook shank behind the eye and come around and wrap once, twice. Now you can position the antenna the way you want it to look. And by the way, this is the worst part of the fly. You start to tie these flies and you feel gloriously successful, and then you get to this point and then it can be difficult. Now I'm adding in a few more thread wraps, and now I'm going to take my whip finisher add in about 3 thread wraps or 3 whip finishes. Pull it nice and tight. Take my scissors, carefully clip it off, and then this little loop up here, carefully clip it off. Now we've got both of them. See what the fly looks like? Now we're going to take our head cement and immediately, and this is very important, these flies will come untied easier than you can even imagine. So you really have to put head cement on this pattern. Trying not to get it in the eye of the hook. Okay, I'm going to give just a little bit of a haircut. These back legs, I want to be just ever so slightly shorter than the other ones. I don't know why. I don't think the trout could tell you any difference. Again, it's just being a perfectionist. So, tail, 6 legs tied with 3 strands of rubber legs, antenna, and this is your Pat's rubber legs, and this is a killer fly for fishing on the Rio Grande, the Conejos, and even some of the smaller streams like the South Fork. So I hope you've enjoyed this first edition of the Fly Tyers Bench. I'll be back probably on a bi-weekly or every 2 week or 2 month segment, and especially when we do our video meetings through Zoom. Thanks a whole bunch, and thanks to Marty Jones for this idea of presenting these. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.